I didn't think a life could change because of a trash bag, but that night proved me wrong. The smell hit me first, sharp and sour, the kind that clung to your clothes long after you left work, and I almost kept walking because my shift had already run 12 hours and my feet felt like they were made of broken glass. But then I heard it, soft at first, like a whimper carried by the wind between the alley walls behind the restaurant, and something in my chest tightened in a way I couldn't ignore, so I stopped. Rain dripping from the edge of the fire escape above me, soaking through my thin jacket as I turned back toward the dumpster I'd passed a second ago, telling myself it was probably just a stray cat, that I didn't have time for this, that I needed to catch the last bus home before midnight. But the sound came again, weaker this time, and I knew it wasn't an animal, not exactly. I don't remember deciding to move, only that suddenly I was standing in front of the metal lid, my hands shaking as I reached out, hesitating for just a second, because some instinct deep inside me whispered that opening it would change everything. And then I pushed anyway. The lid creaked open, and the smell got worse, thick and suffocating, but I forced myself to look, scanning the dark pile of black bags until something moved, just barely, and my heart dropped so fast it felt like I missed a step on a staircase. There was a small bundle tucked between the bags, wrapped in a torn blanket that had once been pink, but was now stained and damp, and for a second my brain refused to process what I was seeing, refused to accept that the faint sound was coming from a child, a little girl who couldn't have been older than 5, her face pale under the flickering alley light, her lips trembling as she let out another weak cry. "Oh my God," I whispered, the words barely audible over the rain, and suddenly I was moving fast, climbing halfway into the dumpster without caring about the mess, reaching for her with hands that didn't feel like mine, because they were steadier than I felt inside, lifting her carefully, afraid she might break if I held her too tight, and she was so light it scared me, like she hadn't been held properly in days. Her small fingers curled into my uniform as soon as I pulled her close, instinctively, like she was grabbing onto the only thing keeping her from disappearing. And that was the moment something inside me locked into place, something final, because whatever happened next, I knew I couldn't put her back, couldn't walk away, not anymore. Hey, you're okay," I murmured, even though I had no idea if that was true, brushing damp strands of hair from her face, trying to check if she was breathing evenly, if she was hurt, my mind racing through everything I'd ever learned from basic first aid videos and half-remembered instructions, and all I could think was that she needed help now, not later, not after I figured things out now. The rain picked up, cold drops soaking through both of us, and I shifted her against my chest, shielding her as best I could while I stepped back from the dumpster, my shoes slipping slightly on the wet pavement as I looked toward the street at the end of the alley, calculating distance, time, options, all the things you don't realize you're capable of thinking about until someone else's life depends on it. "I've got you," I said again, more firmly this time, even as my heart pounded so hard it made my ribs ache. And for the first time since I'd opened that lid, she made a sound that wasn't just fear, a small, broken breath that felt like trust, and that terrified me more than anything else, because trust meant responsibility, and responsibility meant I couldn't fail her, not tonight. I didn't know who she was, where she came from, or why anyone would leave a child in a place like that. But as I held her tighter and stepped out into the dim glow of the streetlight, I had the strangest feeling that I had just stepped into a story that didn't belong to me, one that was already in motion long before I arrived, and one that wasn't going to let me walk away when it was over. I ran. I did not think about where or how far, only that standing still was not an option anymore, not with her small body pressed against mine and her breath coming in uneven, fragile pulls that made every second feel like a countdown I could not afford to lose. So I pushed through the alley into the street, the cold night air hitting my face as headlights passed by and tires hissed against wet asphalt. And for a moment I froze under the glow of a flickering street lamp, because the world outside kept moving like nothing had changed while everything inside me had shifted completely. And I realized I did not even know her name. "Hey, can you hear me?" I asked softly, adjusting my grip so I could see her face better, my fingers brushing her cheek. Cool, but not freezing, and her eyes fluttered just enough to tell me she was still there, still fighting, and that was all I needed to keep going. The nearest hospital was about half a mile away, maybe more if I cut through the wrong streets, and I knew I could call for help. But my phone battery had died hours ago during my shift, and the thought of wasting even a minute searching for someone else when I could already be moving made my chest tighten. So I started walking fast, then faster, my shoes slipping slightly with each step as I held her closer, trying to shield her from the rain with my own body like that would somehow make a difference. Stay with me, okay? Just stay with me, I whispered, not sure if I was talking to her or to myself, because the truth was I was scared in a way I had not felt in years, not since I was a kid learning how quickly the world could turn its back on you. And that memory hit me hard as I looked down at her. Something about the way she clung to me, pulling up pieces of my own past that I usually kept buried. Nights when I wished someone had shown up for me the way I had just shown up for her. A car passed too close, splashing water onto the curb, and I flinched, tightening my hold instinctively, my heart pounding louder than the rain now. And that was when I heard it, the low hum of an engine slowing behind me. Too smooth, too deliberate to be coincidence. And every instinct I had sharpened from years of being alone told me to keep moving. Not to look, not to engage, but the car matched my pace, rolling quietly along the street like it had decided I was its destination. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the rhythm of my steps, on the weight in my arms, on the hospital sign I knew was somewhere ahead if I just kept going. But then the headlights shifted, angling slightly, and a black SUV pulled up beside me, large enough to block out the streetlight for a second, casting us both in shadow, and my breath caught before I could stop it. The window did not roll down right away, which somehow made it worse, the silence stretching just long enough for my mind to fill it with every possible reason this could go wrong. Every story I had ever heard about people like me getting pulled into situations they could not escape, and I felt my grip tighten around the little girl as if I could shield her from something I could not even see yet. Then the door opened. Not fast, not aggressive, just precise, controlled, and a man stepped out like he belonged exactly where he was, like the world adjusted around him instead of the other way around. Tall, composed, dressed in a way that did not fit this street or this hour. And even in the dim light, I could see the way his presence shifted the air, subtle but undeniable, the kind of authority that did not need to be announced to be understood. He looked at me first, not at the child. And that somehow made my pulse spike harder, because it felt like being measured, evaluated in a way that went deeper than just what I was holding. And for a second neither of us spoke, the rain filling the space between us, until his gaze dropped to the small figure in my arms, and everything about him changed so slightly most people might have missed it, but I did not. I saw the exact moment something inside him tightened, sharpened, focused. "Where did you find her?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Not raised, not rushed, but carrying a weight that made it impossible to ignore, and I swallowed hard, shifting my stance without meaning to, because suddenly it felt like the answer mattered more than anything else I had done tonight. "In the alley," I said, my voice quieter than I wanted but still clear, forcing myself to hold his gaze even as every part of me screamed to look away. "In a dumpster behind the restaurant." The words sounded unreal even as I said them, like they belonged to someone else's story, not mine. And for a heartbeat the street went completely still, like the city itself was waiting for what would happen next, and I realized with a sinking certainty that whatever came after this moment, there was no going back to the life I had before. The man did not react the way I expected. He did not rush forward, did not reach for her, did not raise his voice or ask a dozen frantic questions like any normal parent would, and somehow that made everything feel heavier. Like whatever world he came from followed different rules than the one I understood, and I stood there in the rain holding a child that might belong to him, while his silence pressed down on me harder than any shout could have. His eyes stayed on her for a long second, studying every detail, the damp blanket, the way her fingers curled into my uniform, the faint rise and fall of her chest, and I realized he was not just looking, he was confirming, checking something only he could recognize. And when his jaw tightened just slightly, I felt it like a shift in the air. Behind him, two more doors of the SUV opened without a sound, and men stepped out, dressed just as precisely, moving with the same controlled calm that made my instincts flare, not chaotic, not careless, but purposeful, like they already knew exactly where to stand and what to do without being told. And suddenly I was very aware of how small I must look to them, soaked from the rain, holding something that clearly did not belong to me. One of them took a step closer, his gaze sharp, scanning me from head to toe in a way that made my shoulders stiffen, and I tightened my hold on the little girl without thinking, pulling her slightly closer as if I needed to prove something. Maybe to them, maybe to myself. "Sir," the man said quietly, his tone careful, like he was waiting for permission more than offering advice. But the man in front of me did not answer him, did not even look away from the child. And then, finally, he moved. Not fast, not aggressive, just one step forward, closing the distance between us until I could see the details I had missed before, the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the way his expression stayed controlled even when something underneath it clearly was not. And when he spoke again, his voice was lower, quieter, but it carried something sharper now, something that made it impossible to mistake the importance of what he was asking. "Did anyone else see you take her?" For a second I blinked, thrown by the question, because it was not what I expected at all, not relief, not gratitude, not even anger, but something strategic, something that made it clear he was already thinking several steps ahead of this moment, and I shook my head quickly. "No, I was alone," I said, forcing the words out steadily even though my pulse was racing. "I just heard her and I could not leave her there." The last part came out softer, more honest than I intended, and his eyes flicked back to mine for a brief second, sharp and assessing, like he was measuring the truth in what I said, and I held his gaze even though it made my chest tighten, because I needed him to understand that I had not done anything wrong, that I had not taken her, that I had only found her. The little girl stirred slightly in my arms then, a small movement that drew both of our attention at once, and her fingers tightened weakly in the fabric of my shirt as a faint sound left her lips. Not quite a word, not quite a cry, but enough to make something in his expression shift again, deeper this time, more personal, like whatever control he had built around himself had cracked just enough to let something real through. He reached out then, slow enough that I had time to react if I wanted to, but I did not pull back, did not step away, because something in the way he moved told me he was not going to take her by force, not in that moment, and his hand hovered for just a second before brushing gently against the side of her face, a touch so careful it did not match the power he carried everywhere else, and I felt my breath catch without warning. "Lily," he said quietly, and the name seemed to settle into the space between us, confirming everything I had not known until now, that she was not just a lost child, not just someone abandoned, but someone important, someone whose absence had already set something much bigger in motion. Her eyes fluttered again at the sound of his voice, just barely, and I saw the way his shoulders stilled, the way his focus sharpened entirely on that small reaction, and for a moment the world narrowed down to just the three of us standing there in the rain, everything else fading into the background. Then he straightened, the shift immediate, the softness gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by something colder, more controlled, and when he looked at me again, there was no confusion left in his expression, only certainty. "You are coming with us," he said, not loudly, not forcefully, but in a tone that made it clear it was not a request, and something in my chest dropped at the finality of it, because I understood in that instant that whatever line I had crossed when I opened that dumpster, I had just crossed another one now, and this time, there was no turning back. I did not move right away. His words hung in the air, steady and absolute, and for a second I just stood there with Lily in my arms, the rain still falling around us like nothing had changed, even though everything had, and my first instinct was to say no, to take a step back, to protect the small piece of control I still had left in a situation that had already spun far beyond anything I understood. But when I looked down at her, at the way her small hand was still gripping my shirt like it was the only solid thing in her world, the word caught in my throat and would not come out. "I need to take her to a hospital," I said instead, my voice steadier than I felt, tightening my hold slightly as if that alone could keep her safe. "She needs help now." It was the only thing that made sense to me, the only priority that mattered, and for a moment I thought he might argue, might dismiss me, but instead, his gaze sharpened in a different way, not dismissive, not annoyed, but focused, like I had said something he had already considered and approved of before I even spoke it. "You will," he replied calmly, and then he turned his head slightly, not even raising his voice. "Prepare the car." The men behind him moved immediately, no hesitation, no questions, one stepping forward to open the rear door of the SUV while the other scanned the street again like he was mapping every detail into memory, and I felt a strange shift inside my chest, something between fear and reluctant trust, because whatever else this was, it was organized, controlled, deliberate in a way that made chaos feel impossible. I hesitated only a second longer before stepping closer, the wet pavement reflecting the dim streetlight beneath my feet, and when I reached the open door, I paused, glancing back at the man who had just changed the course of my night with a single sentence, because something about this still felt unreal, like I should wake up any second back in the alley with nothing but the echo of a sound I imagined. He met my gaze without hesitation, his expression unreadable but certain, and gave a slight nod, not impatient, not forceful, just enough to tell me there was no other option left to consider, and I climbed into the car. The interior was warmer than I expected, the air carrying a faint scent of leather and something subtle and clean, and I adjusted Lily carefully in my arms as I sat, trying to keep her steady while the door closed behind me with a quiet, final sound that seemed to seal something I could not undo. A second later, he slid in across from me, the movement smooth, controlled, and the space suddenly felt smaller, more defined, like the boundaries of my world had narrowed down to the inside of this vehicle, to the child in my arms, and to the man watching both of us with a level of attention that made it impossible to forget where I was. The car started moving almost immediately, pulling away from the curb with a quiet power that matched everything else about him, and I felt the motion in my chest more than anything else, the realization that I was leaving behind the only version of my life I had known, even if it had only been an hour ago. I shifted slightly, adjusting the blanket around Lily, brushing her damp hair back again as I checked her breathing for what felt like the 100th time, counting each rise and fall like it was the only thing keeping me anchored, and I became aware of his gaze again, steady, unblinking, not invasive but constant, like he was memorizing every movement I made. "She responded to you," he said after a moment, his voice quieter now, less like a command and more like an observation, and I glanced up at him, unsure how to answer that, because I did not know why she did not know what made her hold on to me instead of pulling away, and I swallowed before speaking. "I just picked her up," I said softly, my fingers still resting lightly against her back. She held on. It sounded too simple, too small to explain something that had felt so significant, but it was the truth, and he studied me for a second longer, like he was deciding what to do with that answer, what it meant in a world I could not yet see. Outside the window, the city blurred past in streaks of light and shadow, familiar streets turning unfamiliar as we moved farther from everything I recognized, and I felt a quiet realization settle deep in my chest, heavy and undeniable, that this was not just about getting her to a hospital anymore, that whatever had started in that alley had pulled me into something much larger, something that had already decided I was part of it whether I understood it or not. And as I looked down at the small girl still holding on to me, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I was not the one in control anymore. The car did not stop at a place I recognized. We passed the public hospital I had been aiming for without slowing down, the glowing red emergency sign sliding past the window like something I was not allowed to reach anymore. And before I could say anything, we turned onto a quieter street lined with buildings that looked newer, cleaner, the kind of place I had only seen from a distance, and something in my chest tightened again, because this was not where I had planned to go, not where I had control. "That was the hospital," I said, unable to keep the edge out of my voice as I shifted Lily slightly, checking her breathing again, counting, always counting. "We just passed it." He did not look out the window, did not seem surprised, and when he answered, his tone was calm, certain in a way that made arguing feel pointless even before I tried. "Not the one she needs," he said, and there was something in the way he said it that made me hesitate, not because I agreed, but because it sounded like a fact he had already confirmed, not an opinion open for discussion. The car slowed a moment later, turning into a private drive where soft lights lined the path and security gates opened without a single word exchanged, and I realized this was a different kind of hospital entirely, one that did not advertise itself with flashing signs or crowded waiting rooms, one that operated quietly, efficiently, behind closed doors. The vehicle came to a smooth stop under a covered entrance, and before I could even adjust my grip, the door beside me opened, a man standing ready but not reaching for her, not touching, just waiting, and I appreciated that more than I expected, that no one tried to take her from me without permission, even in a place like this. "Bring her," the man across from me said, already stepping out, and I followed without thinking, my shoes hitting the dry pavement under the awning as the rain continued just beyond its edge, the contrast sharp enough to make everything feel more real. Inside, the air was bright and controlled, the kind of clean that felt almost too perfect, and people moved quickly but without panic, their focus immediate the moment they saw us, or more accurately, the moment they saw him. A doctor approached, mid-40s maybe, already pulling on gloves, his attention shifting from the man to the child in my arms in one smooth motion. "How long?" he asked, direct, efficient, and I answered before I even realized I was the one speaking. "I do not know. I just found her maybe 10 minutes ago. She was in the cold. She was barely." My voice caught, and I forced myself to steady it, because losing control would not help her, not now. She was barely responding. The doctor nodded once, sharp, understanding, and gestured toward a room without hesitation. "We need to get her inside," he said, and this time I did hesitate, just for a second, my grip tightening instinctively, as if letting go meant something more than just passing her over, and then I felt it, the small movement against me, Lily's fingers tightening again, weak but deliberate, and it made my chest ache in a way I could not explain. "It is okay," I whispered to her, even though I was not sure who I was reassuring anymore, and then I stepped forward, letting them guide us into the room, staying as close as I could while they began checking her, their movements practiced, careful, focused entirely on her condition. I stayed at her side, my hands hovering, not interfering but not leaving either, because walking away felt impossible, and I became aware of him again, standing just behind me, silent, watching everything with an intensity that made the room feel smaller, more controlled, like nothing here happened without his awareness. "She found her," he said after a moment, his voice low but carrying enough that everyone in the room heard it, and I felt every set of eyes shift toward me for a second, not questioning, not accusing, but acknowledging something I had not expected to matter this much. The doctor gave a slight nod without breaking focus, continuing his work, and I exhaled slowly, a breath I had not realized I had been holding since the alley, since the moment I opened that lid and saw her there. I should have felt relief, standing in a place like this with people who knew what they were doing, but instead, a different realization settled into me, quiet but heavy, because as I watched them take care of her, as I stood in a world that was not mine, I understood something I had been trying to ignore since the moment he said I was coming with them. This was not over. This was only the beginning, and whatever happened next was not something I could simply walk away from, not anymore. Time stretched in a strange way inside that room, every second both too fast and too slow at the same time, and I stood there watching as they worked around her, their movements calm but urgent, voices low and precise, calling out numbers and observations that blurred together. In my mind, because all I could focus on was the rise and fall of her chest, the small signs that she was still there, still holding on, and I realized I had not let go of the edge of the bed since we entered, my fingers gripping the metal rail like it was the only solid thing left in my world. "She is stabilizing," the doctor said after what felt like forever, his tone steady, professional, but carrying just enough reassurance to make something in my chest loosen for the first time since the alley, and I exhaled slowly, the breath shaky despite my effort to control it. Stabilizing. Not safe. Not fine, but better than before, and I held on to that word like it was enough. I became aware of him again without needing to look, the quiet presence behind me that never faded, never shifted, and when I finally turned slightly, I saw that his focus had not left her once. Not even for a second, his expression as controlled as ever, but his eyes sharper now, more intent, like every small change mattered more than anything else in the room. "What happened to her?" he asked, his voice low, directed at the doctor, but carrying an edge that made it clear the answer mattered, and the doctor did not hesitate. "Exposure, exhaustion, likely dehydration," he replied, checking a monitor before glancing briefly at the child again. She was left in conditions that could have been much worse if more time had passed. The words settled heavily, not dramatic, not exaggerated, just factual, and I felt my grip tighten again, a quiet anger rising beneath the relief, because someone had put her there. Someone had decided she did not matter, and the thought made my chest burn in a way I could not ignore. I looked down at her, at the way her small face seemed calmer now under the bright lights, and I felt something shift again, something deeper, because she was not just a child I had found anymore, not just someone I had carried out of a dumpster. She was someone I had chosen not to leave, and that choice felt heavier with every passing second. Will she wake up? I asked, my voice softer now, directed at no one and everyone at the same time, and the doctor glanced at me briefly before answering. She should, once her body recovers a bit more, he said. She is stronger than she looks. Stronger than she looks. The words echoed in my mind, and I felt a small, unexpected warmth in my chest, like that mattered more than anything else he could have said. I did not realize I had stepped closer until I felt the edge of the bed press against my legs, my hand hovering near hers again without touching, not wanting to interfere, but not wanting to be far either. And for a moment, everything felt still, quiet, contained within the walls of that room. Then he spoke again. Leave us, he said, not loudly, not forcefully, but with a finality that made the staff move without hesitation, one by one stepping back, finishing what they needed to finish before exiting the room until it was just the three of us left, the hum of the machines filling the silence that followed. I felt it immediately, the shift in the air, the difference between being surrounded by people and being alone with him, and my shoulders stiffened slightly without meaning to, because whatever came next, I knew it was not going to be simple. I turned slowly, meeting his gaze fully for the first time since we arrived, and up close, it was even more intense, not just because of who he was, but because of how certain he looked, like every piece of this situation had already been placed exactly where he wanted it, except for me. You should go home, I said before I could stop myself, the words coming out quieter than I intended but firm enough to carry. She is safe now. It felt like the right thing to say, the logical thing, the normal thing in a situation that had been anything but normal, and for a second, I almost believed it would work, that I could step out of this, return to my life, pretend this night had been something I could leave behind. But he did not move. He did not even blink. His gaze held mine steadily, and when he finally spoke, his voice was calm, measured, and absolute in a way that made my stomach drop before the words even fully registered. You are not leaving, he said, and there was no threat in it, no raised tone, nothing outwardly forceful, but the certainty in his voice made it clear that this was not something open for discussion. And in that moment, I understood something I had been trying not to see since the alley, since the car, since the second I stepped into his world. Saving her had not just changed her life. It had changed mine too, and not in a way I could walk away from. I shook my head before I even realized I was doing it. The movement small but instinctive, like my body was reacting faster than my mind could process what he had just said. And for the first time since this night started, something inside me pushed back, not loud, not dramatic, but firm enough to make my voice steady when I spoke. I did what anyone would have done, I said, my fingers tightening slightly against the edge of the bed as I forced myself to hold his gaze. I found her. I brought her here. That is it. The words felt simple, reasonable, the kind of logic that should have made sense in any normal situation. And for a moment I held on to that, to the idea that this could still be normal if I just said the right thing, if I just stayed grounded in what I understood. But his expression did not change. If anything, it became more focused, like he was studying me the same way he had studied everything else tonight, not dismissing what I said, but placing it somewhere in a larger picture I could not see. No, he replied calmly, and that single word carried more weight than anything louder ever could. Not anyone would have done that. I felt my chest tighten at that, not because he raised his voice, but because of the certainty in his tone, the way he said it like it was not an opinion but a fact, and I opened my mouth to argue, to tell him he was wrong, that people helped each other all the time, that this did not have to mean anything more than what it was, but the words caught when I glanced down at Lily again, at the way she had not let go of me even now, even as she rested more peacefully under the soft glow of the hospital lights. My argument lost its strength before I could even form it. She held on to you, he continued, his voice quieter now, not softer, but more deliberate, like each word was placed exactly where he wanted it. not to anyone else. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry, because I had noticed that too, had felt it from the moment I pulled her out of the dumpster, but hearing him say it made it feel different, more significant, like it was not just a coincidence but something that mattered in ways I did not understand. She was scared, I said finally, though my voice lacked the certainty it had before. She would have held on to anyone. But even as I said it, I knew it was not entirely true, and something in his gaze told me he knew it too. He stepped a little closer then, not enough to invade my space, but enough that I could feel the shift, the quiet pressure of his presence filling the room, and for a second I forgot about everything else, the hospital, the night, the exhaustion, all of it narrowing down to the space between us and the child resting beside me. "You are still here," he said, and there was no accusation in it, no judgment, just observation, but it landed heavier than anything else he had said so far, because he was right. I could have stepped back when we arrived, could have left her with the doctors and walked away, but I had not, and I did not even fully understand why. I looked down again, my fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the blanket near her hand, careful not to disturb her, and the answer came quietly, without effort. "Because no one stayed for me," I said, the words leaving before I could stop them, softer than anything I had said all night, but clearer than anything else too, and the moment they were out, I felt the weight of them settle in the room, heavier than I expected. Silence followed, not empty, but full, like something important had just been placed between us, and when I looked up again, his expression had shifted just slightly, not softer, not weaker, but different, like he had learned something he had not expected to learn. "Then you understand," he said after a moment, his voice steady again, but carrying something deeper beneath it, "why you are not leaving." I felt it then. The finality of it settling into place, not forced, not argued, just accepted in a way I could not quite explain, because somewhere between the alley and this room, something had already changed, something that made walking away feel less like freedom and more like abandoning something I was not willing to abandon. I exhaled slowly, my shoulders lowering just slightly as the tension shifted into something quieter, more complicated, and I realized with a strange clarity that this was not about being trapped, not entirely. It was about being chosen, and choosing in return, even if I had not meant to. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice steady again, meeting his gaze without hesitation this time, because if I was already part of this, I needed to understand what that meant. His answer came without pause. "Now," he said, his eyes flicking briefly to the child, and then back to me, "we find out who thought they could leave my daughter behind." And for the first time since the night began, I felt something shift inside me that was not fear, not confusion, but something sharper, something that told me this story was not just about saving her anymore. It was about everything that came after. His words did not feel like a threat, and somehow that made them more dangerous, because there was no anger in them, no urgency, just a quiet certainty that whatever he decided would happen, and I felt that settle into my chest in a way I could not ignore as I looked down at Lily again, at the way her breathing had steadied, at the small signs that she was coming back to herself, and for the first time since I found her, I allowed myself to believe she would be okay. The room stayed quiet for a moment longer, the kind of silence that was not empty but waiting, and then there was a soft sound behind us as the door opened slightly, one of the men from earlier stepping in just enough to catch his attention without interrupting fully, a subtle gesture that seemed practiced, controlled, like everything else in his world. He turned his head just a fraction, listening without needing the man to speak loudly, and I could not hear the exact words, only the low murmur, but I saw the shift immediately, the way his posture straightened, the way his expression sharpened just enough to signal that something had changed. "Where?" he asked, his voice still calm, but carrying a new edge, and the man answered quietly, precise, efficient, and whatever he said made the air in the room feel tighter, more focused, like the next steps had already been set in motion. I watched him closely, not because I wanted to, but because I could not look away, because every movement he made seemed to matter in a way I did not fully understand yet. And when his gaze returned to Lily, there was something colder behind it now, something that had nothing to do with her condition and everything to do with whoever had put her there in the first place. "They found something," I said before I could stop myself, the words slipping out quietly but clearly, and his eyes shifted to mine for a brief second, assessing, confirming, and then he gave a small nod. Enough to begin, he replied, and that answer did not feel complete, did not feel like something meant to reassure me. But it was enough to tell me that whatever came next was already in motion, and I felt a strange tension build in my chest. Not fear exactly, but awareness, the kind that comes when you realize you are standing at the edge of something much bigger than you expected. I looked back at Lily, at the way her hand rested near mine now, no longer gripping tightly, but still close enough that I could reach her if she stirred, and I felt that same pull again, the one that had kept me here, the one that made leaving feel impossible even when I knew I should want to. I am not part of this, I said quietly, more to myself than to him. But the words hung in the air anyway, fragile and uncertain, because even as I said them, I knew they were not entirely true anymore. He did not respond right away, and when I looked up, I found his gaze already on me, steady, deliberate, like he had been waiting for me to say that. You were the moment you chose to open that lid, he said, his voice calm but final, and I felt the weight of those words settle into place, not harsh, not forced, just undeniable, because he was right. In a way I could not argue with, because everything had changed in that moment, whether I wanted it to or not. The machines continued their quiet rhythm beside us, the soft beeping a reminder that the most important thing in this room was still the small girl lying between us, and I reached out without thinking, my fingers brushing lightly against hers, just enough to feel the warmth there, the proof that she was still here. Then what does that make me? I asked, my voice steadier now, not challenging, not afraid, just needing to understand, and for a second, something in his expression shifted again, subtle but real, like he was considering the answer more carefully than anything else he had said so far. His gaze moved from me to Lily and back again, and when he finally spoke, his tone was quieter, but somehow more intense. Someone I do not lose track of, he said, and the words settled into the space between us with a weight that felt different from everything else. Not just control, not just authority, but something more complicated, something I did not have a name for yet. I felt my breath catch slightly, not from fear, but from the realization that this was not just about protection, not just about keeping me close because I had been there, but something deeper, something tied to the choice I had made without understanding the cost of it. Outside the room, I could hear movement again, quiet but purposeful, the kind that suggested things were already unfolding beyond these walls, and I knew that whatever they had found, wherever this was leading, it was not going to stay contained here for long. I looked down at Lily one more time, at the calm that had settled over her, and then back at him, and I understood something I had been resisting since the beginning, something that no longer felt like a question. I was already part of this, and whatever came next, I was going to see it through, whether I was ready or not. The first time she moved on her own, I almost missed it. It was not dramatic, not sudden, just a small shift beneath the blanket, the faint tightening of her fingers against the sheet, and for a second I thought I imagined it, that my mind was playing tricks on me after everything that had happened. But then her eyelashes fluttered, slow and uncertain, and I felt my breath catch in my chest like the world had paused just to see what she would do next. Lily, I whispered before I could stop myself, my voice softer than it had been all night. Careful, like speaking too loudly might break something fragile that had just started to come back together. Her eyes opened only halfway at first, unfocused, searching, and I leaned a little closer without realizing it, my hand hovering near hers again, not touching but close enough that she would know someone was there if she needed it. For a moment, she looked past me, confused, like she was trying to place where she was, and then her gaze shifted, finding me, and something changed in her expression, not fully aware, not completely present, but enough to recognize, enough to remember the person who had pulled her out of the dark. Her fingers moved, weak but deliberate, reaching, and this time I did not hesitate. I let my hand meet hers, gentle, steady, and she held on again, not as tightly as before, but with a quiet certainty that made something in my chest ache in a way I could not explain. You are safe? I said, the words coming easier now, more certain, because for the first time, they felt true. I became aware of him beside me again, not because he moved, but because the air shifted, that same controlled presence filling the space, and when I glanced up, I saw it, The change in him that no one else might have noticed, the way his shoulders had lowered just slightly, the way his focus, still intense, had softened at the edges in a way that made him seem less like a force and more like something human, something that cared in a way he did not show easily. "Lily," he said, his voice lower than before, and this time there was no question in it, no distance, just recognition, and her eyes flickered toward him, slower this time, like she was pulling herself back from somewhere far away, and I felt her grip shift again, not letting go of me, but acknowledging him too, like she was standing between 2 points of safety and did not know which one to choose. The room stayed quiet, no machines sounding alarms, no urgent movement, just the soft rhythm of her breathing and the space we all shared, and I realized something then that I had not fully understood until that moment, that she was not just recovering physically, she was choosing, in her own small way, who she trusted, who she reached for, and that choice mattered more than anything else happening around us. "She remembers," I said quietly, not sure if I was speaking to him or just saying it out loud to make it real, and he did not answer right away, but when he did, his voice carried a weight that felt different from before. "She does not forget easily," he said, and there was something in the way he said it that made me think he was not just talking about her. I looked back at Lily, at the way her eyes were clearer now, more aware, and I felt something settle inside me, not fear, not confusion, but a kind of clarity that had been building all night, piece by piece, until it finally made sense. I had found her. I had chosen to stay. And now, she was choosing too. The door opened quietly behind us again, the doctor stepping back in, checking her condition with a practiced glance, and giving a small nod that confirmed what I already felt, that she was going to be okay, that she had made it through the worst of it, and I felt a slow, steady breath leave my chest, the tension easing just enough to let something else take its place. Not relief alone, but something heavier, something that came with understanding. I looked at him again, at the man who had pulled me into this world without raising his voice, without forcing anything, just by existing in a way that changed everything around him, and I realized that nothing about this was temporary, not the night, not the choices, not the connection that had formed in the space between us and the child who now held both our attention. "I should go," I said quietly, the words automatic, familiar, the kind of thing you say when something feels finished, but even as I said it, I knew it was not true, knew that nothing about this was over, and when he looked at me, his expression steady, certain, I saw that. He knew it too. "No," he said, not harsh, not forceful, just final, and this time, I did not argue, did not try to explain or justify, because somewhere along the way, I had stopped wanting to leave. I looked back at Lily, at the small hand still holding mine, at the life I had stepped into without meaning to, and I understood something I would not be able to undo. I had found her in the darkest place imaginable, and instead of walking away, I had stayed, and now, standing in the quiet aftermath of that choice, I realized the truth that would follow me long after this night ended. Some lives you save do not let you go.